Unless you're an orc, I'm happy to see ya.
Your prestige grows, my lord. News of your conquests spreads far and wide. Your developing power is noted by even the most distant of kings and bestial lords.
Hello, this is Tolvo. Welcome to episode 2 of Let's Play Total War Warhammer. This is the first Warhammer game in the Total War series, not the second one. But I'm planning on doing the second one later. I could technically do the second one only and include most of the content that is in Total War Warhammer 1, because the second game has a mode called the Mortal Empires. And in the Mortal Empires mode, you have the old world as well as the new world. But that wouldn't give the exact same experience, and Norska is not available yet. Norska is only available in Total War Warhammer 1 and in multiplayer. So we are back to following the adventures of Azhag the Slaughterer, as well as the Greenskins.
Zog off.
Oh, that was rude of that orc. Just telling me to shove off like that. I was in the middle of talking. I'm not quite sure what he said. Also, my computer is not super fast. I'm just editing out the loading screens. I thought it would be simple enough. Similar to other strategy games, you can group up your units into different groups and lock them in. When you group them, you want to put them into their positions beforehand by grabbing their portraits and sliding them along. Like, if you want to have one unit in the middle formation among all these units, slide it to the middle, then group them all. You can hold down shift when clicking from one to other to collect all the others in between and grab them all at once. Or you can hold control, and then you can click on each individual one that you want and group them. I prefer to have two main groups of melee and then missiles. And then if I have cavalry, a third group for cavalry. And then usually I make the different types of lords their own groups. So if I have multiple melee lords, I group them in one. Now, when I get to pick the engagement, I prefer to have my missiles at the front and unloading first, and then move my infantry up from behind through the missiles or have the missiles fall back. This is easier to do in Total War Warhammer 2, where skirmishing is much more fleshed out and works more often. Skirmishing mode in Warhammer 1, it doesn't work too well. For some missile cavalry it'll work. You have to be careful. I just made a mistake here. When selecting the movement of these units, I sent the trolls up. The trolls are actually faster than everything else, so they went up first and took some missile fire, when I want my orc boys to be taking the missile fire instead, especially since they're shielded. You usually want your shielded units to be taking the missile fire, or your heavy armored ones, if the missiles aren't especially armor piercing. Now, later on, I may be switching up how I'm forming my armies, especially for the Greenskins. I'm a big fan of using a lot of missile units, but for the Greenskins that isn't always very optimal, because the Greenskins don't have good armor-piercing arrow units, other than the rusty arrows. This battle is a bit of a mess. But it's quickly turning in my favor. And there we go, battle won. Here are some regiments of renown. I know someone in the thread was wanting to see some squigs, so I figured I would pick them up right away. Squigs are kind of like the Warhammer version of Pac-Man with legs and tails and scales. They just have big mouths and want to eat everything. They also make for a decent mount for cavalry. So regiments of renown are specific groups of units that you can only have one of each. They cost extra and they cost more to maintain, but they're generally more powerful. They'll have additional bonus effects. So here I am going into the tech trees. Early on they don't matter it too much. The later tech is more important, in my opinion, for a lot of the factions. For some, early on, it can be helpful for the Empire, for instance. And maybe the Vampire counts. Also, just checking here what I need to unlock Grimgor Ironhide. We'll be wanting to get him later on. He's a very powerful lord. Picking up another lord to help defend the territories. I'm also giving him Orc Biggins. Later on, after I'm done conquering in the south here, I'm going to snake my way back up and then pick up all those Orc Biggins. You can exchange units and armies. They have to be directly touching each other to do so. Sometimes it can be handy to have a lord recruit units somewhere and then bring them to your main lord, switch them, and then disband all the old units and the new lord you used. Also, there is my Wog that is fighting alongside me, helping me out with conquering the Dwarven holds. I was also sending a Goblin Big Boss up here to deploy near the Chaos Wastes for a quest to get Azhag his crown. Once he has that crown, we'll finally be able to cast spells with him. It'll make a huge, huge difference. Now, for the Greenskins, there are two main magic lores. There is the lore of the Big Wa and the lore of the Little Wa. The Big Wa is more about bombastic and powerful spells that deal a lot of damage or have very direct effects, whereas the lore of the Little Wa is more about subtlety, about small changes that have big impacts. It's the difference in idea between the goblins and the orcs. The goblins and orcs being the main greenskins, thus their name. Azhag, however, has the lore of death, which is generally reserved for chaos and the vampire counts in this game. Early on, it made him brutal in multiplayer back when Soul Leech was just busted. He used to be able to just cast it on a hero and they would practically die. Also, while I'm conquering to the south, the dwarves are taking some of my own territory, and we're kind of making little exchanges.
All you want. What you want?
Using the underway, you can travel through mountainous areas incredibly quickly. Whereas normally you'd have to follow all these winding paths and take so long to get anywhere, the dwarves and orcs can very easily traverse through mountains. You do have to be wary though, you can be caught in the underground, and then you'll have to engage in a battle against the person who has caught you. If you lose this battle or win it, the losing side will all die. They don't get to retreat, they don't get to fall back and recover, they just all die. This can make using the underway a little bit dangerous, but in general, in these mountainous regions, you still want to use it. Especially if you have a powerful army. Now, when in different stances, you can't always do all the things you want to. When you're in the underway, for instance, you cannot recruit units, and you cannot attack while in the underway. You have to leave it to do an attack. Which I somewhat disagree with. I think you should be able to attack dwarf settlements while in the underway, because a lot of them are underground anyway. The dwarves and greenskins are not the only ones that have unique types of movement. The beastmen are able to use the beast paths, lesser known paths that the beastmen use for traversing, especially useful around forests. And then the wood elves get the same. They're able to move through the undergrowth. Very, very similar just to the beastmen.
Who needs stabbing?
Some of these units you see here are actually DLC units. A lot of the greenskin units that are Night Goblin related are from the DLC, such as the Night Goblin War Boss. They're from the King and the Warlord DLC. That is about Skarsnik versus, what is his name? The leader of Clan Angren. It's Iron something. But I can't remember now for the life of me. But anyway, it added a lot of units to the Greenskins. It added Regiments of Renown to the Greenskins as well as Squigs. Squigs were not in the base game. At one point, Squigs were a bit too powerful because of their armor piercing. Against dwarves, you could just make big swarms of squig herds and chase them down with the armor piercing and kill them. And that Goblin Big Boss is still just making his way up there. That takes forever. Up to the far north, you'll find Norska, the Norskan tribes of Norsemen. A little bit on the nose, I know. They mainly worship the Chaos Gods, these primeval creatures that are of demonic origin, that want to see the destruction of the world and chaos brought. With the Lords of Chaos, is also how we get demons.
Your
Demons
conquests
are...
strike fear into the hearts of your enemies, mighty lord. The wisest amongst them will know that fate is on your side. I have foreseen it.
Demons are basically fragments of Chaos Lords. Each demon is its own self and entity, but they're basically smaller parts of this bigger whole. So here I was just checking the garrisons. Every settlement has a garrison. It's determined by the type of settlement it is, its size, what level of upgrade it's at, whether or not it has walls or guard towers or special buildings that create garrisons. Typically your capital has your biggest garrison. This can make assaulting capitals of others very difficult, because even if they don't have an army there, the garrison may be enough to put up a good battle. Because of this, sometimes you can leave settlements alone, because their garrison will be enough to handle most problems. When you're spreading out a lot and dealing with a lot of order problems, it can be a good idea to build walls in each settlement, even though you could use that for precious resources like gold gathering or growth, encouraging and growing.
All you what you say.
It can be a handy thing, because that way you don't have to keep going around and dealing with rebellions or smaller harassment. What you typically want to do is have one main army that is expanding, and then one defensive army that is going around your territory and holding order, dealing with rebellions, and trying to ward off any attackers.
I'll crush you all. Yeah. The crowd of sorcery agrees.
Now, I'm using auto-resolve a lot. Sometimes auto-resolve can be a bit finicky. It may give you a huge advantage or give you too little of a chance when you would otherwise be able to win or lose the battle if you fight it yourself. I'm using it a lot to save time, because a lot of these battles would just be the same thing over and over again. When I feel like a battle is impactful enough or important enough to show, though, I will of course record the actual battle. It is possible that my recordings might not be perfect as well, in which case I can also go into replays, because this game has a replay system. Any fight you have, you can save as a replay, and then you can watch it back, or even try and fight it again yourself to see if you can do better or worse.
The boys are praised.
This army up here is pretty powerful. Night Goblins have poison arrows, and then the big guns are stronger than the Orc boys. The big guns, though, are not shielded, but they're better against cavalry. They're still not armor-piercing, though, so they're not great against dwarves. They can be pretty handy against Bretonnia, though, because Bretonnia relies so heavily on cavalry. Somewhat the same for the Empire.
I'll crush them all.
I was trying to decide between sending out this war boss to try and take some territory or not. You do have to be wary about having a second army. Each army increases the cost and upkeep, and you have the Lord to keep in mind as well for their upkeep. You generally want to keep yourself in between the 1,000 to 2,000 earned per turn amount of gold. That way you're still having some resources to get more and upgrade your buildings and recruit units, but at the same time having enough forces out there to actually fight the enemies and control your territory. And that Goblin Big Boss is still just going up there.
When I gets there, gonna stab. Let's get stabby. Never.
Something you'll see a bit more to the west and south in the Badlands are Savage Orcs, unfortunately named. The Savage Orcs are more wild and focus less on armor and more on offense. They're stronger than Orc Boys. They're stronger than the regular Orc Errors, the Orc Error Boys. But they are unarmored and a bit more wild. They do wear war paint that increases their defense a bit. You'll see Azhag, the Great Green Prophet, using Savage Orcs a lot. He's sort of the de facto leader of the Savage Orcs that you can use. He has a lot of benefits for them. Similar to how Skarsnik, the Goblin Warlord, is much better for using goblins.
I am true power. The Iron Hat says no.
With the way that settlements work, early on you want to have growth buildings. Later on you can get rid of them, but what you need is population surplus for improving your settlements and upgrading them. And then the more that you upgrade the main building of the settlement, the more you can build there, the more money it'll make, the bigger its garrison will be, and as well, the more you can upgrade other buildings in there to the higher tiers. You have two main types of settlements. You have a capital, and then you have the smaller minor settlements. So minor and major. Major settlements can be upgraded to tier 5 and have tier 5 buildings and have more buildings than the rest. Regular minor settlements can go up to tier 3, have tier 3 buildings, and can usually support up to 3 buildings other than the main settlement building. If they happen to have a harbor, that can only go up to tier 3 and will take up 1 slot also, so they'll only have 2 other buildings they can have. Not all factions work like that though. For instance, Chaos and the Beastmen are Horde factions, similar to Attila from Total War Attila.
Alright lads, here's the plan. We're going into this lost city, but before we can rummage, we're gonna clear out all them undead things. Give them a good kicking, once we've killed everything. No one's to go looting until I say so. This is my plan, so I get the top picks. I'm in charge now, and I need a shiny boss hat. Anyone who disobeys will get a boot up their backside. Remember, this is a cursed place. The shamans don't like it, so no messing with stuff you don't understand. If you summon something from the void, you'll have to deal with it yourself.
Yes, there are Horde factions that are their own moving settlement that they have to upgrade during turns and Generally, they don't generate their own money. They have to sack and raid other places to get money.
Drink the brew.
And then there are the Wood Elves, who are able to settle anywhere, but outside of their main 4 settlements. Is it 4 or 3? I think it's 4. They can only go up to tier 1 and have very few building options as they're just small outposts. Alright, now we're in this quest battle here, fighting against the forces of Chaos and the Vampire Counts, or Undead. We're here to get Azhag his crown, his big, shiny new head thing. You're going to see some mistakes this battle. I did not fight very well. Also, you notice that Azhag's character model, or not Azhag, Azhag. How could I confuse the two? But Azhag's character model already has his crown on his head. That's how the legendary lords work. They already have their items on their character models. It's just stat effects and the storyline that you get out of the quest battles. This is because I guess it would be extra resources to have different character models for as they're along different paths and different lengths into the quests.
You bird. Quick,
Mounts are, however, a different story, because legendary lords that can have mounts will still not start out with them. For instance, Karl Franz's Deathclaw Griffin, you have to actually upgrade to get that. Then same for Skullmuncha for Azhag the Slaughterer, his Wyvern mount. You have to reach certain levels with your lord to unlock certain things. Oftentimes mounts are one of those examples. And then other things require quests to unlock them. Like for Azhag, for upgrading his magic tree, you need to finish the quest with the crown. Now, certain lords cannot have mounts. Grimgor Ironhide, for instance, will always be on foot. But this means he can't always go on walls. You don't always want to give your lords mounts. Certain ones are gimmies. You definitely want to give them. Like, Karl Franz is his Deathclaw. You want to give him Deathclaw. Giving him a horse or a Pegasus, on the other hand, though, maybe not. Oftentimes they lose defense and offensive abilities and stats when you give them certain mounts. You can upgrade mounts, like turning a warhorse into a barded warhorse, but it might not always be worth it. It really depends on whether or not you want them to be more mobile or more tanky and offensive on the ground. You also have to be wary that certain units will be better against them. Like, if you have your lord on foot, spearmen aren't as much of a problem. If they're on a horse, suddenly spearmen are a problem. Arrows are also a problem. They have an easier time hitting larger targets, which mounts create larger targets. Especially for flying mounts, they can become pincushions. They are big targets for ranged units. So the battle's not going so great. Our front line is very weak. I should have probably waited and gotten all of the orc bigots first before doing this battle. You can do it with these orc boys, and I think a part of the problem too was I was too missile focused with my army. I should have had more of a front line. Here we see the two lords going at it, and Azhag is clearly superior. So something you saw the lord do was he did a charging attack. Every melee unit can charge. You want them to be sprinting to charge. Charging increases the damage done on the first hit. You can also countercharge, thus balancing things out. So if an enemy is charging at you, you want to charge them unless you're a unit that can brace, such as halberds or spears. Certain units have defense against charge. Again, halberds and spears. Simple tactics, using spears and polearms against cavalry is just the basics of old medieval warfare. And warfare before that and even after it. Because of that, you need to understand how sometimes you'll want compositions of your armies. So for instance, I don't really have a good option for spears. I have goblins as the normal spear units for the Greenskins, but they really suck. They are just terrible. So sometimes orc boys are even better against cavalry. What you typically want to do is at the flanks of your army, set up your spears or halberds or whatever is anti-cav, because the cavalry generally want to hit the flanks and the sides or go for the backs of your army and hit your missile units and your siege units. If you spread out your spear units and halberd units at the back, you can cover those weak points from cavalry and prevent them from charging, or at least punish them heavily if they do decide to. Spears and halberds are also good against monsters. Monsters are, again, large creatures. Here is another example too. I'm using my own units to flank. If you have a wider battle line than your enemy, you want to take those at the sides and then flank them and collapse on their rears. Now my front line is really starting to fall apart. This is a problem with the Greenskins with their low leadership. It's a part of why I was leveling Azhag up to be a more powerful leader, is to make my orcs more useful. It won't be as great for later orc units such as the unfortunately named Black Orcs. Black Orcs are a chaos creation. They were created by chaos dwarves, if I remember right. And they're just bigger, stronger, more powerful, and they're immune to psychology. So they'll stay in there, they have a lot of leadership, a lot of armor, and hit really hard, and they're armor piercing. But we're not going to be seeing them for a while. Grimgor, though, Grimgor is the leader of the Black Orcs. He's known as the most powerful Black Orc. Alright, and we're wrapping up the battle now. My front line is starting to come back. Azhag is boosting the leadership of everyone around, and at the end here I was just using up all my abilities, because why not? So that fight wasn't too bad. I did have to fight 4 entire armies, but we managed it. And Azhag is now high enough level, so it is time to get Skull Muncha. We don't have our crown and thus no magic yet, but we are going to get to fly around in a wyvern now, which is pretty awesome. Let's take a little bit of a look at Skull Muncha on the map. Of course, we first have to unlock Skull Muncha. But this is the end of the episode. I will see you next time as we follow more of the Greenskins and what they're doing and learn a bit more about Total War Warhammer. See you next time.